welcome to our Midday Report here on TVP World. I'm your host, Diana Skaya. Dozens of Ukrainian drones hit Moscow over the weekend, including a fuel depot in Serpukhov. As U.S. and Chinese officials prepare for high-level talks this week, the conflict is expected to top the agenda. The question is can diplomatic efforts finally stop Moscow from sowing terror in Ukraine?
As Russia continues to pound Ukraine's power grid before the coming winter, Kyiv fights back and aims its drones at Russian oil refineries. On Sunday, dozens of Ukrainian drones targeted Moscow, including this Serpukhov fuel depot. In his latest evening address, Ukraine's President Zelensky addressed the continued need for unity as Russia wages its war on the country.
In just this 1 week, the Russians have used almost 1,200 strike drones and already 50 missiles of various types against Ukraine, most of them ballistic. Protection from such a threat can only be a joint effort. No nation in the world should be left alone against such a threat.
With the recent collapse of peace talks that were set to take place in Budapest between U.S. President Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin, experts now point out that it's a ceasefire that should be the main goal on the road to peace in the war-torn country.
Putin does not believe that Ukraine is a legitimate sovereign country. He believes it should be part of Russia. He does not believe that Zelensky is a legitimate leader. He calls him a Nazi. So he's never going to reach a deal. That means our objective should not be the peace agreement per se. It should be a ceasefire, getting enough pressure on Russia that he feels compelled to stop attacking. If we can get Russia to the point of a ceasefire, then we need to accelerate our efforts to integrate Ukraine into transatlantic institutions, EU and NATO, as quickly as possible so that we can solidify that tenuous peace.
And as the U.S. President Donald Trump begins his trip in Asia, with a meeting planned with China's leader for Thursday, he says he would like China's help to deal with Russia in an attempt to bring an end to the war in Ukraine.
I'd love China to help us out with Russia. We put very big sanctions on Russia. I think those sanctions are going to be, they're very biting, they're very strong. But I'd like to see China help us out.
Since the start of Russia's unjustified and unprovoked attack on Ukraine, China has ramped up exports of machine tools and microelectronics, supporting Russia's weapon manufacturing. It has also been buying large volumes of Russian oil and gas, helping Moscow continue to generate revenue despite Western sanctions. Experts are, however, skeptical over how far China is willing to go to pressure Russia.
My hunch is that probably Ukraine would not really be discussed. What will be discussed probably how the Americans will exert the pressure to lessen the imports from Russia as far as oil imports are concerned.
Nearly 4 years in, Russia's war in Ukraine remains Europe's deadliest conflict since World War II. On Monday morning, Russian forces launched a number of aerial attacks on the Kharkiv region, killing 1 person and wounding 3 others, according to Ukraine's national police. With global powers discussing peace, the looming question is how long Ukraine can sustain its fight.
On Sunday, Russia tested its nuclear-powered BUREVESTNIK cruise missile, which Moscow says can pierce through every air defense system. According to Jeffrey Lewis from the Middlebury Institute, while Russia is, quote, crazy enough to build a nuclear-powered missile, it doesn't mean it's the only country with that capability.
This missile is really like a small airplane. It has a jet engine on it. And just like a jet engine uses fuel to burn oxygen, this does exactly the same thing, but it uses a nuclear reactor to burn the oxygen and produce the thrust. The system is intended to defeat a missile defense. And so the idea is because it can fly for basically an unlimited range, then it can fly around defenses. On the other hand, you could build more defenses, or you could use aircraft to go intercept them. So I don't think the system is invincible, but it's part of the deepening arms race that we're in, where they've come up with a new system and now we have to come up with something to shoot it down. I think we are just generally seeing a greater emphasis on nuclear weapons. We're seeing countries use nuclear threats more and more to get their way in the world. And so while I think a lot of these programs have existed for years, if not decades, the reason Putin is doing this on live TV while wearing fatigues is because he wants to send a certain message. So the United States investigated a very similar system in the 1950s, but decided that it was just too much of an environmental nightmare, and so chose not to build it. So it's true that only Russia has been crazy enough to actually build one of these things, but it doesn't mean that Russia is the only country that could build such a thing. It's just other countries, I think, have thought better of it.
Now, after the Kremlin announced the conclusion of those successful tests, well, Donald Trump spoke out saying that it's not appropriate for Moscow to boast about testing new missiles while the war in Ukraine drags on. Let's listen in.
They know we have a nuclear submarine, the greatest in the world, right off their shores. So, I mean, it doesn't have to go 8,000 miles. And they're not playing games with us. We're not playing games with them either. We test missiles all the time, but, you know, we do have a submarine, a nuclear submarine. We don't need to go 8,000 miles. And I don't think it's an appropriate thing for Putin to be saying either, by the way. He ought to get the war ended. A war that should have taken 1 week is now in its soon fourth year. That's what he ought to do instead of testing missiles.
More on the U.S. president. Well, Donald Trump has just arrived in Tokyo, where he will meet with Japan's newly elected Prime Minister, Sanae Takaichi. Our reporter, Gabriela Fesnak, has more.
Sanae Takaichi will soon face a real test of her political acumen, a meeting with the notoriously mercurial U.S. President Trump. While the Japan-U.S. relationship flourished under the first Trump presidency, Japan has recently found itself on the receiving end of U.S. tariffs. Much will depend on Takaichi's ability to follow in the footsteps of her political mentor Shinzo Abe, who was also known as the Trump Whisperer, and her ability to form a strong relationship with the U.S. president. Shinzo Abe was the first foreign leader to visit the then President-elect Trump in November 2016, presenting him with a $3,700 gilded golf club. The two leaders then bonded over golf in Japan and at Trump's Mar-a-Lago estate. Trump's fondness for Abe seems to extend to Takaichi, who was his protege.
I look forward to meeting the new Prime Minister. I hear phenomenal things. She was a great ally and friend of Shinzo Abe, who is my friend.
Trump is set to meet Takaichi on Tuesday. The main points on the agenda include implementing $550 billion in Japanese investment, pledged in exchange for lowering tariffs, as well as improving Japan's defense capabilities. Takaichi has vowed to increase Japan's military spending in line with Trump's wishes, but the U.S.-Japan post-war treaty, which requires the U.S. to help Japan if it was attacked, remains a source of tension. The U.S. president is reportedly pressuring Tokyo to contribute to the cost of U.S. troops stationed in Japan. Although if you are expecting a major breakthrough, Takaichi is likely to offer further concessions with hopes of reducing the tariffs. After Japan, Trump will head to South Korea, where he is expected to meet with Chinese President Xi Jinping. For TVP World, from Tokyo, Gabriela Fesnak.
The European Union is preparing a new initiative to reduce its dependence on China for critical rare earth minerals, resources essential for technologies like electric vehicles, wind turbines, and defense systems. Now, Brussels plans to unveil the proposal by the end of the year, with a focus on developing alternative supply chains in countries such as Ukraine and Greenland. For more on that, let's go now live to our EU correspondent, Angela Skujins, who is in Brussels. Angela, good afternoon. Now, what is driving this move from the European Commission?
Good afternoon, Diana. So the European Commission state that this is a long-standing issue and they call on China to be a reliable trading partner when it comes to those critical raw earth materials. We're talking about 17 key components that Beijing has the lion's share over. These are necessary for Europe's defence ramp-up, and they produce engines. They also go into naval vessels as well as fighter jets. So this is exactly why the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen on Saturday in Berlin announced her plan for Resource EU. This is what the European Commission spokesperson had to say was behind the big push.
Our analysis of this problem isn't new, and we are engaging in our sovereign capacity as the European Union to try and address the global problem that China has caused with its export restrictions and other measures.
The European Commission expanded, stating that they're going to unveil the plan for what this will look like at the end of the year. It will most likely resemble diversifying trade relationships with countries such as Greenland, Australia, Ukraine and more. They didn't really answer our question regarding what they wanted from these specific countries, but they stated that this will all be laid bare by the end of the year.
Thank you so much, Angela, coming to us live from Brussels. A 34-year-old woman and a 32-year-old man from Ukraine have been detained in Poland on suspicion of operating on behalf of Russia. Now, they're accused of gathering intelligence on Polish soldiers and critical infrastructure used to transport military aid to Ukraine. At a Monday press conference, Jacek Dobrzyński, the spokesperson for the Polish Security Services Coordinator, announced that the pair will spend the next 3 months in custody.
After hearing the charges brought by the prosecutor from the Military Affairs Department of the District Prosecutor's Office in Lublin, the court ordered the detention of these two individuals. They will spend the next 3 months in custody. Importantly, they're among the 55 people previously detained by Polish Special Services for acting against Poland and on behalf of Russian intelligence.
Following a fourth balloon incursion in a row into its airspace, the government of Lithuania has decided to now shoot down any object violating the country's air sovereignty, as well as indefinitely close its border with Belarus. For months, Lithuania has been facing the increasing threat of hybrid attacks coming from their eastern frontier. According to Prime Minister Inga Ruginiene, this shutdown sends a clear message to the agitators.
We are now ready to close the border with Belarus indefinitely, but only with certain exceptions. In this way, we are sending a signal to Belarus and saying that no hybrid attack will be tolerated here, and we will take all the strictest measures to stop such attacks. As of today, the army will take all necessary measures, including kinetic ones, to shoot down balloons, and they will start doing it actively. In this way, we are again sending a signal that we are ready to take even the most severe actions when our airspace is violated.
It's been 3 weeks since Czechs headed to the polls in parliamentary elections and still no government. Andrej Babiš, the billionaire leader of the winning ANO party, is attempting to form a governing coalition with two far-right parties, but negotiations are being dragged out in part due to the controversial social media presence of the nominee for the foreign minister's post. We're joined now live by our correspondent in Prague, Andrew Sweeney. Hi, Andrew. So how long will it be until the Czech Republic has its government? And I mean, how will its policies actually affect Central Europe and beyond?
Well, we don't know exactly how long it will take, but we do know today that according to Andrej Babiš, President Petr Pavel has entrusted him and his ANO party with forming its government. Now, the problem has been so far, particularly from the Motoristi party, the smaller of the two right-wing parties that Babiš wants to link up with. Their a nominee for the foreign minister post, Filip Turek, has a very interesting social media history with posts covering all range of issues, got racism, homophobia, sexism, you name it, he's probably offended someone. This has been dragging on ever since the election 3 weeks ago. Babiš has the numbers, but the programme between these three parties, along with the SPD, that is pro-Russia and anti-EU, is still being decided. What we do know for sure, the Czech Republic will remain in EU and NATO. That is sacrosanct, even though some members of the smaller parties had wanted a referendum on these issues. The support for Ukraine joining the EU will no longer happen. But certainly, the Czech Republic will maintain its position in Europe as part of the Visegrad Forum. That's you.
Thank you so much, Andrew Sweeney, coming to us live from Prague. And that's all for this edition of our Midday Report here on TVP World. I'm Diana Skaya. Thanks for watching, and stay with us for more news and exclusive features.